clean air campaign.
Thank you so much, Paul, and good morning. I appreciate that introduction. And just a good reminder, I've been fired from many jobs, so my work history is quite sporadic. But I want to especially thank Paul and Sarah and Erica Anderson, all the Land to Sky team members who helped make this possible, along with all the other partners. A very sincere thanks to everyone for joining to set aside some time in your busy schedules to take part in this webinar of how local governments can protect air quality while strengthening public budgets. It's an important issue to discuss, and I'm grateful for the work of the Clean Air Campaign that they do and we do across both locally here in our region and across the state. At Land to Sky Regional Council, the counties we serve, Buncombe, Henderson, Madison, Haywood, and Transylvania, share the same geography, which some refer to the native lands of the Cherokee. Despite this common mountain landscape, each local government in our region will approach the challenges and opportunities it faces very differently. That's not entirely surprising for a region that includes both rural and urban, conservative and more progressive, and just a diversity of viewpoints. This range of viewpoints in our region is very positive and is certainly one of our strengths. In that it offers a variety of perspectives and solutions to our shared challenges. However, the tendency toward polarization we see at the national level, certainly can happen here locally. And oftentimes we fail to listen to those ideas of others who we may not always agree with. Certainly conversations on environmental issues have been trapped into this debate over public policy. And sometimes policies regarding our environment, efforts regarding renewable energy may be non-starters with some. However, they may be embraced by others for various reasons. I think that's why this is important, because at the end of the day, we all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, and our shared mutual interests are, we have more in common than we certainly have in our differences. Finding a common language, a common value, while making the most of taxpayer dollars is critically important to approaching environmental issues like clean air. A local leader may not sound like the sound of alternative fuels or EVs and isn't concerned about reduced emissions that may come from running vehicles on compressed natural gas or biodiesel, but showing them how switching a few pickups to run on propane will save a local government thousands of dollars each year. That support can come from people across the ideological spectrum. At the end of the day, a clean environment, a vibrant environment is critical to our economy, and both intertwined with our economic prosperity as well as our environmental and also public health. I believe the work at Land to Sky Regional Council is to serve our local governments, and certainly we serve them. We are accountable to them, and I'm very blessed to have the support from those 20 local governments in our 4-county region. And I'm proud of how our clean cities and transportation teams have done this work on environmental issues by promoting strategies that improve air qualities in ways that speak to our local governments. Just last night, Paul was featured on PBS North Carolina about how transitioning vehicles to alternative fuels has saved us not only a lot of tax dollar funding, but has also improved our environment. I'm excited to support Land to Sky's continued involvement alongside our partners in local government and state agencies, including the Department of Environmental Quality, with nonprofits like the Blue Horizons Project, to engage in a wider public and targeted audiences like our group today on ways to promote clean air. No doubt, here in the mountains, we're blessed to benefit from all the efforts to improve our air quality. Air quality actually has improved over the years, and we're very grateful for the progress that has been made, not only here in Western North Carolina, but certainly regionally, and our friends across the Smokies as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce an individual who is a strong and vocal proponent of clean air, as any in our region. Keith Bamberger is an information and communication specialist with DEQ's Division of Air Quality. He is everyone's favorite member of the Clean Air Campaign and may be best known for his star turns as the Air Avenger, a superhero who engages the public on the importance of clean air. So when I think of Air Avenger, I think of Bill Aker and all the work that he did at Land to Sky, and we certainly appreciate the legacy that Bill left. And so, Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Nathan. I am Keith Bamberger, and I'm the Information and Communications Specialist with the North Carolina Division of Air Quality, and I have the pleasure of working in the Asheville region. The Division of Air Quality has been working with the Land of Sky Clean Air Campaign and Clean Vehicles Program and Clean Cities Program since before I started working for the Division of Air Quality. And our goal is to help individuals, local governments, businesses, all understand that they're both a part of the air quality problems, but they're also part of the air quality solutions. And often those air quality solutions are accompanied by the benefits of saving money. They slow climate change and improve our view of the mountains. And as you can see behind me, there's an image of a dirty air quality day and a clean air quality day. And we're happy to work with and support the Land of Sky in their efforts to improve the health of our air. Now, the Division of Air Quality was already working with Land of Sky before I started in 2004. And in 2004, when it came to the Division of Air Quality, I already knew how to talk to people. I knew how to help them learn, but I didn't know about air quality. So when I asked who I should talk about, everybody had the same answer, that I needed to meet Jim Renfro, who's an air quality specialist with the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I traveled up to meet Jim in a first generation Toyota Prius. First time I'd ever driven one, so I was curious how it would drive as I got up to Clingman's Dome, then walked up the slope to meet Jim. And I could, as I got up to the top where they've got the observation tower, of course, Jim was there. And of course, he was surrounded by a group of people, because when you're a national park ranger in a national park, everybody has questions for you. So this was just one of my first steps in learning about air and air quality. And at that time, I didn't understand how lucky Western North Carolina was to have Jim Renfro as a part of our Clean Air Campaign and our efforts to make the air cleaner. Since 2004, I've gotten to hear Jim speak many times at Clean Air Campaign events. He's always been a strong supporter of the ground level ozone workshop, which the Division of Air Quality and the Great Smoky Mountains National Park partner in, and events like today's Breath of Mountain Air. So I'd like to have everybody give a virtual welcome to Jim Renfro.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Paul, Nathan, and everybody involved in organizing this event today. I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully we can see this. Let's see here. Can you see this?
We can see it. Yeah, you can. You're welcome to put it in presenter view.
How about now?
And yep, all good.
Good. And can you see my mouse?
I can.
Okay, good. All right, I'm going to get going. So I was asked to kind of present, a perspective of where we've been, where are we, where we're heading, and I'll do that right now, and we'll talk about air quality in the region, and you'll see some local and Smokies and Appalachian and even some national perspectives. So hopefully you'll get a good context. I'm going to run through this outline. We'll talk about why we need to do this, the importance of monitoring and understanding our emissions, and then some of the impacts, ozone and particulate matter, a couple of air pollutants that affect public health and welfare, other things, visibility, regional haze, and deposition. So we know good air quality and clear views are important to the now 14 million plus visitors who come to the park annually. That we just broke our record the last couple of years by about 1.5 million. And when they come here, visitors expect clean, clear air when they get here. But there's some mandates, and I'm going to talk about our Organic Act. The National Park Service talks about its mission over 100 years ago to protect park resources, natural, cultural, historic, unimpaired for future generations. That's key to our mission. The Clean Air Act came along, and especially the 1977 amendments to the Clean Air Act talked about protecting Class 1 areas, national parks, wildlife refuges, 6,000 acres in size, and wilderness greater than 5,000 acres in size. These areas that were required to protect air quality related values, visibility, soils, water, flora, fauna, ecosystems. So these areas should be the cleanest areas in the country. The federal land manager, the Park Service, is under the Department of Interior, who's the FLM, and has the affirmative responsibility to protect those resources. We don't have regulatory authority. That's up to the state and local programs that we know and work with. But our data, our research, our monitoring, our outreach that I'm going to share right now is helpful to inform and sometimes even drive the debate for clean air. Air levels at the park have been among the highest over previous years, but over the last, I would say, 20 years, air quality is improving. And I think part of the agenda talked about what are those things that, how have we done that? And it's a combination of things: monitoring, research. These are the tools that Park Service is involved with. Partnerships, collaborating with others, outreach and connecting, and ultimately policies that lead to emission reductions and cleaner air. We've got a pretty extensive monitoring program in the park and in the region. All those red dots are air quality stations, a lot of climate and weather. That's important to understand air quality as well. Just a glimpse of some of the types of things that the states and Park Service and local programs have to do that help us understand. It's not easy, it's not cheap, but we want to have good quality data to understand the status and trends of our air. Some of the uses too, I'll run through these pretty quick, but the obvious ones are: do we meet standards? Are we complying with air quality standards? Sometimes it's some new monitoring, just establish conditions. How are the trends? Are we getting better or worse? We can link that information to the effects work, cause and effect, dose response. Helps us understand the atmosphere, which is changing every year, and those processes helps us model better the future and current. That's tools that we can use to look at strategies. Sometimes the data provides foundations for laws, rules, rulemaking, state implementation plans, sometimes litigation. So the data is valuable there. Or assessing impacts of new sources of pollution under new source review kinds of programs. So those lots of uses. And I think the key is we love to share data. We love to share good data too, to promote understanding with the public and science and Congress, EPA, states, and local communities. If we look at emissions, just a couple of major ones: sulfur dioxide over 40 years. 30 years is down about 15 million tons. This is from stationary sources. Incredible reductions in SO2 emissions. Nitrogen oxides, similar percentage, but about 6 million tons. So over 20 million tons, mostly in the east, of these two air pollutant emissions. On this side, TVA, they provide power to 7 states. Emissions are down about 99%, but there was a time when in the 80s and the 90s, actually emissions were increasing due to some trading and offsets and purchasing of credits where air quality worsened because of this. But since then, hundreds of thousands of tons have been reduced in the region. The projection, this is some of the southeastern state modeling. I'll circle my cursor over the southeast. That's the Vistas states planning organization looking at haze and other things. But this is just comparing 2011 to 2028 NOx and SO2, that emissions are projected to go down throughout this decade significantly. Not to zero, but each state is going to be reducing their emissions. So the prognosis is good there. Can't forget about our natural factors that make this place special. You know, lots of high pressure, lots of sunlight, lots of elevation, lots of topography. These are kind of the natural ingredients: rainfall, humidity, organic emissions, low buffering capacity in our streams and soils. A lot of older growing forests that have less demand. All these are either natural ingredients or delivery systems. So if air quality gets poor, these mountains can stick up like a sore thumb and actually make it worse. Let's talk about ozone real quick. So ozone is a pollutant that is a concern to all of us, EPA. It's one of national ambient air quality standards. It's formed in the presence of sunlight and heat on NOx emissions and VOCs, volatile organic compounds. So it's more or less a summer pollutant, warm season pollutant. It's regulated. It affects people's breathing. It damages forests and crops, and weather, emissions, terrain, elevation, all those things that we have here are important influences on ozone formation and transport and exposure to us. So what does non-attainment mean? And we were in an area that exceeded that standard, the ozone standard, but it's an area that exceeds or contributes to an area that is over the national ambient air quality standard. These are areas that are still in maintenance, trying to maintain that public health standard. Some are still up in the Northeast that are still non-attainment over the standard. There's a stigma. We don't like that. None of us do. Being in a bad air area, we want good mountain air. There's economic concerns, a couple of them. It makes permitting a little more difficult, sometimes requiring offsets. There's transportation conformity, so federal highway dollars could be lost if a projection causes NOx emissions to increase rather than be lower. But there's state implementation plans, limited maintenance plans that are in place now because of that maintenance area. And they're currently actually being reviewed by EPA right now for both the Tennessee and North Carolina side of the park. And these are just good news bullets that we've met previous standards. The ozone standards changed about 3 times since I've been here, since the 80s. But there were, for a while, we didn't meet those standards, but over time, air quality continued to clean up as the standards tightened or became more protective. But currently, we're meeting all those. We're meeting the ozone standard here in Tennessee and North Carolina, so that's good. A lot of our park data has been used, not only the monitoring data, but the effects, the ozone effects to vegetation in a lot of EPA's science and risk assessments. So that's helpful for them. But here's kind of some trends. This is a lot of the Tennessee side. There's the Haywood County, North Carolina purchase knob site. And you can see over time, since the late 80s, the ozone standard is a 3-year average of the 4th highest 8-hour daily average. So it's a little complex, but you see a 3-year average moving over time that has been going down since about the year 2000. Sometimes it's over as these standards tighten, but since about the 2015, we have met that standard of 70 parts per billion. Now EPA is looking at that again, and science may say maybe it should be between 60 and 70, something to keep an eye on. Many of our sites are below 65. So it depends. It could affect us if EPA came in with a new standard over the next year or two. You never know. They've done it before. For now on this side, probably the North Carolina side, Bent Creek, I think, is under that. So that's good. If it's 60, we could have some additional work to do. There is a unique pattern of ozone in the mountains. Loft ozone gets trapped in this nighttime boundary layer of air, and so a bad air day over our mountains can be bad for the whole day and night, and that's important. If we're hiking, if we're heading out early in the morning, it may be low in our urban areas, Asheville or Knoxville, but peaks somewhere in the middle of the afternoon and then comes on back down in the valley. So it's just good to understand the exposures and how that puts people and our ecosystem at risk. Done a lot of ozone effects work at the park. We've worked with EPA, Appalachian State, Auburn for over 40 years looking at ozone and its impacts to vegetation. And it can get inside the leaves. It affects photosynthesis, can cause plants to grow less. Not all species are sensitive. So you can get some changes in the composition of the forest, and it's good to know. But as that ozone level continues to drop, we're probably seeing less and less impacts to the forest, which is good. We get forecasts every day. It's important. That's part of the outreach that the states, local programs, and EPA do through Air Now and the state forecasting. Some days are bad still, not as often as they used to be. But we still want to know if it is, are there things that we can do to reduce our exposure? Are there things that we can do to reduce our emissions? There is an SO2 non-attainment area. We mentioned SO2 is one of the primary emissions, but up in Sullivan County, up in Kingsport, Tennessee, they've been in non-attainment for a few years. Their levels have come down from a design value of 179 parts per billion to 79. The standard is a 3-year average of 75 parts per billion or more. They look at the 99th percentile of the annual distribution, complicated, but still over. So a little hot spot of SO2 emissions. I know Tennessee and Eastman and Kingsport are working on to get that below. Particulate matter is another one. That's another important pollutant that is regulated by EPA, National Ambient Air Quality Standard, for both PM 2.5. Particulate matter 2.5 microns in diameter or smaller. That's the size of a grain of flour. There's a PM10, 10 microns in diameter standard, but it's a mixture of all sorts of stuff. Sulfur, nitrogen, carbon, soil, some natural things, soil, windblown dust, and even sea salt that we can measure. On the Tennessee side, we were non-attainment. The park was part of the Knoxville non-attainment area under both the annual and 24-hour particulate matter standard, but more recent data took a while to get under that and show that, boy, there's no non-attainment areas for PM 2.5 in the southeast. That's good. We want to keep it that way. You can see some of the levels. I've got Swain, Haywood, Buncombe, some of the levels here. You can see the 97 standard. It did tighten from 15 to 12 micrograms back in 2012 and over on a couple of sites. And then since then, it's going down by over 50%. And again, we want to keep it there. There is review by EPA right now looking at that. Should it be lower than 12? Should it be between 8 and 12? So 8 is, there's a couple of sites in Knoxville that are right about 8. And if that were to change, that could change the types of strategies and work to reduce PM particulate matter even more. So we'll keep an eye on that. Good news, it's heading in. This is the daily standard. You can see it's also coming down. These 3 higher levels were the result of just that 2016 November 2 or 3 week period that we all saw Tennessee and North Carolina, North Georgia, those fires that were throwing a lot of particulate in the area. And it can affect a 3-year average, just one episode over a month. Visibility, we'll kind of keep moving here. Some of those same pollutants affect our views. Shikanahay, the Cherokee word for the namesake of the park, the land of blue mist-like smoke up after a rainstorm. That is totally different than uniform haze. This is different. We know viewing scenery is still the #1 reason that an activity that people are involved with. 14 million visits last year. They generate over $1 billion into the local economy every year. So good air, good, clean, clear air is important. In 1977, the Clean Air Act called for the prevention of any future and remedying any existing impairment, visibility impairment in mandatory Class 1 areas. In 99, the EPA came out with the rule that said, well, how are we going to do that? Establish baseline conditions in our Class 1 areas. Great Smokies, Shining Rock Wilderness, Linville Gorge. You can see some of those sites. We did that. The goal of the regional haze rule is to restore the 20% each year, the 20% most impaired or the haziest days. Protect the best days, don't let them get worse, and be at natural conditions by the year 2064. That requires state implementation plans by the states, every state, to EPA, and roughly 10-year planning periods. Monitor and track progress and model the future, the states and us. Most of the state work is looking at projecting to 2028. What will current and future emissions look like in air quality? The first round, we have EPA approved haze plans, state implementation plans. We're in the second round now. Planning is underway. There's been a lot of technical work, consultation, and review by the federal land managers. The public has had a chance to review the drafts for both Tennessee and North Carolina. There's still several states in the region that have not submitted yet. EPA, for those that have, EPA is looking at those plans now. And so over the next year, we'll be able to hopefully get some final plans that are targeting 2028. We've measured visibility a number of ways. I'll kind of zip through here, but there's particle monitoring on filters to look at the chemical and physical properties. There's scene monitoring, just good high resolution cameras that we can use to document the kinds of impairment and visibility that we have. And then optical monitoring, that is a measure of how light is scattered and absorbed from these particles. All are good, all are measured out here at our visibility site at Look Rock Air Quality Station. Here's some trends. The top left is about a 30-year trend of visibility showing the haziness or light extinction and the pollutants that are causing that. The yellow part of each bar is ammonium sulfate. So that sulfate is coming from SO2 emissions. And you can see as SO2 emissions have come down significantly. Remember, we said 15 million tons roughly in the east, hundreds of thousands of tons in the region. That has caused a lot less sulfate to be in the air and much cleaner air. This graphic on the right is what the states and the parks and forests are using to look at haziness on an annual basis. These little blue diamonds are the haziness or haziness index that EPA uses. And then this projection that the states are projecting, the lower the number, the clearer it is. And so they're saying by 2028, we're going to be at this 15 deciview, this hazy index, which is under this glide slope toward natural conditions. And in fact, below the 2048 target of progress. So that's good. We want to continue to make progress. We think that there's opportunities right now to continue to make progress. This is just a graphic of what it was. Keith showed it in the city. You know, we like good visibility no matter where we're at, but even in our mountains, you know, over the past 20 plus years, visibility has significantly improved. If we live and work here, we know that these were the kinds of days that we had every day in the summer. And this is more like what we have now, blue skies and green mountains, and opportunity to continue to improve. Deposition is one of the last ones. Again, the same pollutants, nitrate, sulfate, nitrogen and sulfur, get in our rain, dry deposition, cloud, all contribute and cause our soils and stream waters to change, to be more acidic. And you can see that this is sulfate and nitrate measured about 40 years worth at Elkmont, our wet deposition. But as that comes down due to these reductions and improvements, pH has gone up. That's a good thing. The higher the pH, the less acidic, about 10 times plus less acidic. Fantastic. Deposition, not concentration. This is deposition. So how much mass is falling, and that you can see the significant reductions of sulfate and nitrate, but not much change at all with ammonium. Also contributes to nitrogen. That's mostly from agriculture, fertilizer, waste lots, waste lagoons from hogs and chickens and cows, cattle. And so they're contributing nitrogen deposition to our mountains. Something to work on to try to, implement best management practices to lower those kind of emissions. Dry deposition is also down from nitrogen and sulfur. That's good. That contributes just as much as rainfall does. So dry deposition of the same pollutants. And throughfall, we measure that up in the high elevation. So from cloud water, which is about 4 times greater than the rainfall, but that's also down. Both are about down 83% since the mid 80s. So that's good news. The effects are really, there's aquatic and terrestrial. So we know soils can be changed. It basically, you're affecting the nutrient cycling of the soils. Too much nitrogen leaches out good stuff, calcium, and strips that out of the streams and soils. That can affect the pH of the stream water, just like it affects the pH of rainwater. And the lower the pH, both chronically and episodically, so if it rains, we see reductions in long-term pH of our high elevation streams. There is no standard for acid rain. We are violating the Clean Water Act in 12 Tennessee streams due to low pH. They're impaired from too much atmospheric deposition of nitrogen and sulfur. That problem is mostly at the high elevation. So this is a map of buffering, acid neutralizing capacity. There's the state line right down the middle. And the more sensitive watersheds tend to be along the higher elevations. These orange and red areas have very little buffering capacity and more acidic. These are the 12 streams. We did work with Tennessee, North Carolina, EPA over the past 10 to 15 years to come up with a plan and figure out, well, how much will it take to bring this back? And this is one of my last slides. It's complicated, but it's important. So this red and pink stuff over here, that's the deposition of sulfur and nitrogen since 2000 to the present. The green is a 3-year average of that. And you can see, wow, that's come down 60%. Great news. Acid deposition is down about 70%. We modeled what it would take for every one of those streams to get back up to pH of 6. And it will be needed to get down to 3.3 kilograms per hectare per year deposition over an area. And so that's similar to the regional haze glide slope concept. The model and vistas, that regional haze modeling that's underway right now, provided not only haze projections to 2028, but acid deposition in 2028, and shows that this bar right here shows that we'll be under 6 in the year 2028 on our way to 3.3 by the year 2080. So this is the road to recovery. This is our glide path to restore those streams as we continue to make progress. So again, nitrogen and sulfur emissions are still important from all sources. So good news, air quality is improving from, I would say, significant emission reductions throughout the East and throughout the region, from the efforts from Tennessee, from our local programs from North Carolina. And but challenges will remain if we're going to maintain these standards or maintain possibly more protective standards and our ecosystems and visibility. So thank you. That was a whirlwind tour, but hopefully that was helpful just to get an idea of what we're what we're fighting for and why we're doing the things that we do to make the air cleaner and clearer. Thank you.
Jim, I really appreciate your time and your insights. Here
Well,
in
sure.
the Asheville area, the transition of the Duke Energy plant from coal to natural gas. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of impact the shift away from coal maybe had in this region and beyond?
Yeah, there's been a lot of effort from Duke and Progress Energy, also TVA before and after the consent decree, where they've agreed to make reductions, doing similar things, converting to natural gas, retiring. Those close in, those more local sources, and we know from all of the efforts that have happened, assessments that the states, EPA, the federal land managers do, that our local sources contribute more on the bad air days, on the hazy days, on the bad ozone days, that the poorer visibility days, the higher PM. So those reductions that were made, most of those benefits stay here. Sure, there's downwind, regionally downwind, and this is a regional cumulative issue. But those reductions that are made in Asheville and East Tennessee and the Tennessee Valley are huge and directly improve the air quality here at the park and the region.
May I ask one more question? You talked
Sure.
about opportunities to continue to make progress. What have you identified? What are the opportunities that you're looking at?
Well, I mean, you hear about our efforts to grow our electric vehicle fleet, be more fuel efficient. There's industrial sources and even some power plants that there's still maybe possible some technologically feasible, cost-effective controls that can be put on now that can that's worth it, that will get us to these targets and standards sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you again, Jim, for your insights, and thank you very much for the excellent opportunity for a segue to EVs. I'm going to introduce now Jacob Bolen. He is the program manager for Plug-in NC. Plug-in NC is a statewide program that promotes driving electric vehicles through education and outreach, consulting, and resource development. They celebrated their 10-year anniversary in 2021. And now I can toss it to Jacob for a presentation on where EVs have come from and where they're headed here. Thank you, Jacob, for participating today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Paul, and for the invitation to speak. And just wanted to give a shout out, Jim. That's the first time I've heard you speak, but a really wonderful presentation. And thanks for sharing your insights. And yeah, for the segue to electric vehicles as well. So I definitely recognize some familiar names, here joining us today, but also a lot of new ones as well. So just want to introduce myself really quickly as I share my PowerPoint presentation here. As Paul mentioned, my name is Jacob Bolen. I serve as the program manager for Plug-in NC. I hope many of you are aware of Plug-in NC, but if you're not, I'll just go ahead and make a shameless plug to encourage you to reach out and join and interact with Plug-in NC as an EV outreach and education community across the state. We really want to amplify the voices of local transportation electrification efforts. So whether that's fleet electrification, deployment of different types of charging stations. If you are an electric utility, I see a couple of, at least one distribution cooperative in North Carolina represented today. And if you have other electrification initiatives, please feel free to reach out and join. So with that, let me go ahead and just get my screen launched here.
We can see it. You're all set.
All right, great. Yeah, so what we're thinking about in terms of this conversation, and again, I appreciate the really the transition from Jim Referencing the fleet electrification opportunities, obviously that's a really big deal when we think about some of the air quality opportunities, and certainly we see that there are more benefits than that, but that one should certainly not be understated, especially today. One of the things I'd like to say right off the bat, just to level set us, is just the idea that, of course, light duty, medium, heavy duty electric vehicles have no tailpipe emissions. So, certainly we see the benefit right out of the gate in terms of why this technology matters, especially as it relates to this topic. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the fuel, the electricity that powers these vehicles is getting cleaner over time. So when you make a decision to drive electric, to support electric transportation across the state, it's not only having a benefit today, but it is continuously kind of helping move those benchmarks, tomorrow and into the future as well. Of course, most of that is as we start to take on more types of renewable energy into our kind of energy inventory and economy for generation, and really think about the ability to effectively distribute it as well and use it. So with that, I'd like to just mention, as Paul shared, Plug-in-C just recently celebrated our 10th anniversary or birthday. And so just kind of taking a look back at where we were 10 years ago, it's really, I think, empowering to kind of see where we started at this time. There were really just maybe a couple dozen electric vehicles on the road across the state. And as you can see, a very, very small number of charging stations as well. Really at that time, it was very exploratory. There was a lot of research, a lot of planning, and I just really applaud the efforts of actually a lot of individuals on this call today who really were critical in starting the conversation about what the value of electric transportation and electric vehicles, and really the planning that was needed to effectively start to implement these technologies. So that is essentially how Plug-in-C was born, as a coalition across the state of planners, different types of state agency representatives, utility representatives, and more, just as a way to really kind of begin the conversation and start that really localized outreach education, really at that point, of course, around kind of the upstream planning for this technology. So I'm going to skip through a couple of years here and jump to 2015. So 2015, we start to see the deployment of charging stations really grow, and we're starting to see actually some different, kind of scales or levels of adoption with the light duty electric vehicles. As we can see at this point, the charging stations are really following very closely where the EVs are. That certainly makes sense. But at that time, it was a lot of localized level 2 charging stations to really support the EVs where they were, right? Jumping ahead again to 2017, we see more progress in terms of the deployment of stations and, really a few other kind of scale changes in terms of the adoption. And then going from 2017 to 2020, we really start to see some increases. So I'll just take a minute to see if anybody has any guesses what maybe the one single biggest factor was for driving adoption, to where we see it now in 2020 on the screen. If I had to guess, and maybe in the sake of time, I'll just keep moving, but that's really going to have a lot to do with the release and availability of the Tesla Model 3. Really made huge strides in terms of the access to electric vehicles across the state, kind of a very significant kind of model offering, if you will. And then looking at 2021, we continue to see things really growing here. So it's super exciting. I think that more, maybe more impactful to me than just the scale of adoption across the counties is the deployment of that public charging. These are level 2 and DC fast chargers kind of combined here. So it might be a little bit difficult to kind of parse out, maybe in some cases where the gaps are. But I think, just qualitatively, it's really wonderful to kind of see this level of adoption happen over this amount of time. So I just kind of wanted to level set with that in mind of kind of where we've been and bring us to kind of where we are today in terms of electric vehicle adoption and deployment. So, according to the Department of Transportation's website, and maybe I'll first make a plug to say that the Department of Transportation under Executive Order 80 was tasked with actually publishing all sorts of vehicle registration data, which has been extremely important and impactful, for our understanding of electric vehicle adoption and for all of the planning and education, outreach efforts that kind of go from that. I think we really saw it from Jim, kind of the value of baselining and data. And so just want to applaud the Department of Transportation for publishing and sharing this data on a monthly basis. So it gives us the opportunity to really see this. And the reason why I mention that is for many of you, who represent municipalities and local governments, who work for planning agencies, electric utilities. There's so much value in being able to see not only your specific county data, but also the surrounding counties as well, right? We certainly know that vehicles and drivers are not limited to where they live. They certainly like to travel around the state, explore the natural beauty of the state. And so, it's a great opportunity to really keep in mind, what kinds of trends we're seeing from our neighbors as well. So we've got about 37,000 electric vehicles on the road. This is as of the end of 2021, made up of right at 25,000 fully electric vehicles and about 12,000 plug-in hybrids. Keep in mind those plug-in hybrids can really range anywhere from 8 to 10 miles of electric range, all the way to about 45 is kind of the top kind of industry class for a plug-in hybrid right now. So that gives us, about 37,000 EVs on the road right now. It's interesting to see these trends change where we've got 25,000 fully electric vehicles. Not that long ago, it was really expected or what we were seeing is that these numbers between the fully electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrids were a little bit closer. Now we're starting to see a bigger gap, which is encouraging because it's not that plug-in hybrids don't have a role, they certainly do. But I think it just shows that more and more individuals are comfortable driving fully electric vehicles. Really, I think that speaks to the infrastructure availability and also the model availability, right? What the manufacturers are offering as competitive products in the market for fully electric vehicles. Looking at some of the registration numbers from DOT, we also see that there are about 8.6 million vehicles on the road in North Carolina. So, the percentage of EVs is certainly less than 2% in terms of what's on the road today. And I haven't pulled those numbers in a while, but it's likely making up about 2% of our new vehicle sales. So we really have a lot of work to do when we think about, this level of adoption and deployment today versus where we really want to be over the next 5 to 10 years, really moving forward. Really quickly, just talking about the infrastructure, we've got about 900 level 2 charging stations across the state, which is about 1,900 plugs. And we've got about 135 DC fast charging stations, which is about 500 plugs. And I think it's really important to mention that not all DC fast charging plugs are created equal. So when we do and make planning decisions around electric vehicles, we really have to keep in mind what the market share is, certainly of Teslas, because they have their own proprietary charging networks. But then also, we're starting to see a little bit more standardization between connector types, from manufacturers. But that hasn't traditionally been the case. So a lot of times when you go to a DC fast charging station, you'll see a couple different plug types. That's important because if I'm driving, let's say a Chevrolet Bolt, I might not be able to utilize some of those other plugs. And so it's just really important to keep in mind that we're kind of noticing those market trends and parsing the data where possible, especially for DC fast charging stations. There's a whole kind of set of topics and conversations we could talk about too in terms of charging speed for DC fast charging stations that we probably won't get into today, but feel free to follow up with some questions about. So as I mentioned, what's driving the growth here in North Carolina? I think certainly there's a much longer list than this, but this is just kind of a few of the high points here. So we're really starting to see those competitive products come onto the market, as well as new segment offerings, right? So how many of your friends and family members got really excited, or maybe we're much more able or willing to talk about vehicle electrification, with the announcements of like the Ford F-150 Lightning, for example, right? It just, it brought a level of marketing and consumer awareness that maybe all of us, kind of in more grassroots campaigns have been trying to do for a long time. Of course, they have, they have the marketing ability to really scale that in such a universal way. And so that's really valuable for us as we think about the awareness of electric technologies. With those product offerings also come the charging providers, right? So not just the vehicles, but actually the stations themselves. So we have the EVgo's and Electrify America's and the charge points of the world that are really working to, deploy whatever their business models are for charging infrastructure across the state, because, they see value in it, of course, from a for-profit perspective. So I think it's really wonderful, and that starts to kind of fold into what we've seen already traditionally with the Teslas of the world with their supercharger networks, really driving the infrastructure development, certainly following the trends of where the vehicles are, but more than that, laying the groundwork for where the vehicles can be. And I think that that's really wonderful to see. Certainly makes, again, some of the outreach and education around these technologies much easier. We in North Carolina are really, really fortunate to see a level of utility engagement, that most other states across the country do not. Certainly across the Southeast, we have a really great sense of potential and maybe even opportunity with vehicle electrification from, the cooperatives of North Carolina. Duke Energy has a pilot program that's been approved before the Public Utilities Commission, and they filed for another. Really, we see a sense of utility strategies are certainly different across the state, but the interest and the initiatives are really there, which is just super exciting. We certainly see, as many of you know, plenty of municipal initiatives and localized demand, which is really great. Of course, we saw the economic development impact. I'm sure many of you heard of the Toyota battery facility announcement just a couple months ago. That's basically the biggest influx of manufacturing dollars that the state has ever seen at 1.3 billion. That was actually kind of shadowed some of the other announcements as well by the likes of Arrival, for example, which is based kind of outside of Charlotte with different operations centers. And then lastly, we see all sorts of state policy and funding opportunities. So everything is kind of coalescing right now where there's just so much potential for deployment and implementation, and the need for planning, right? The need to really kind of make sure that we're all communicating, that we're not just deploying charging infrastructure and encouraging adoption as quickly as possible, but that we're really doing it as effectively as possible. So in terms of kind of the state of the state, where are we today? And then where are we moving over the next, let's say, 10 years? So today we've got about 37,000 electric vehicles on the road. Many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with Executive Order 80, which calls for 80,000 electric vehicles by 2025. And then many of you are probably also aware of the recent executive order by Governor Cooper, number 246, which actually calls for 1.25 million electric vehicles by 2030, and comprising of 50% new vehicle sales would be electric fuel types. And so, that's just an incredible number. And I think it really speaks to kind of the rapid acceleration that we're going to be seeing here. As we saw with those kind of state maps too, in terms of the adoption, where we were a few years ago is certainly very different than where we are today. And so it's just really great to kind of continue to track along that exponential kind of growth curve, and just super exciting to kind of see some of those numbers and baselines and expectations really set. I think it gives all of us, the opportunity to coalesce and kind of track our progress against kind of tangible numbers and expectations. So I don't really have time to kind of go through too many kind of prescriptive approaches for what local governments especially are doing around EVs and EV charging ecosystems. But here's kind of a handful of ways that local governments relate, right? As Jim mentioned, there are all sorts of fleet applications. I know there's going to be a fleet roundtable after this presentation, so I don't want to dive too much into that. But we've also got the local charging offerings, right? So we've got basically the ability to kind of align our strategies or value propositions in whichever way, your municipalities, local governments, organizations kind of relate to this technology, whether it's from a sustainability perspective, a resiliency perspective, public health and air quality, environmental justice, economic development, tourism and community amenities, or even supporting travel corridors, right? So even if your location is not the final destination, certainly plenty of opportunities to really allow folks to spend some time and enjoy certainly everything that Western North Carolina has to offer. Local governments are also really thinking about how to maybe define or redefine permitting processes, right? We've been working with the city of Raleigh to kind of share more explicitly what the checklist is for permitting EV charging stations, whether that's from a residential or non-residential perspective. I think one thing that is just so important here, I'm going to talk about it a little bit in a second, but EV readiness. So when we think about how to prepare for the future, it's certainly critically important to really expand the availability of charging infrastructure today. But I would say equally, or maybe even more importantly, is really preparing for those numbers that we're going to be seeing over the next 5 to 10 years, really planning for that today. We see a lot of news and headlines out there about, citywide ordinances. That's certainly one way to do it. I certainly understand that that's not the only way, and that sometimes those mandates maybe aren't, viable at this time. And so there are plenty of other kind of opportunities to really just be thinking about, how to plan for EVs in a construction process. What types of conversations might you be having with the commercial, especially the non-single family home developers, that are really active in your communities. And then, of course, as well, we all want to share kind of the outreach potential, the marketing kind of values and the success stories. And so again, please, reach out to Plug-in NC and myself if there are any stories or charging stations or fleet adoption stories that you might like to share. We would be so happy to amplify that message. So just very quickly, I do want to share kind of an EV readiness example. One of the questions I get so often is, if we're thinking about EVs down the road, what's a good number in terms of how many parking spaces should have the potential for, the ability to have and install a charging station down the road? The answer is always it depends, based on kind of what the parking availability looks like, what the location type is, what type of building is it, everything like that. But I just want to kind of highlight a recent example from the city of Orlando, where this was implemented through the city council as part of kind of a very thorough stakeholder process, was really kind of applauded kind of in the industry, certainly in the region, in terms of a really great kind of make ready example. So here we see basically about 20% of EV capable spaces, planned for multi-unit dwellings, and then also multifamily or other parking structures. And then kind of from a private perspective, from a commercial perspective, we see an expectation of about 10% EV capable. Hopefully you can see off to the right there, the difference between EV capable, EV ready, and then of course we have EV installed, where the station is actually in the ground and operational, which as you start to get to a certain level of parking spaces, again, especially with the kind of private multifamily, hotel or other parking spaces at 2%, at anything above 50. So this is just an example of kind of how you can think about that. Again, we have such an opportunity right now to leverage all sorts of funding dollars that I know Brian and Jen will be talking about a little bit later. But the ability to really plan for cost-effective growth and deployment down the road is just going to be so critically important, especially as maybe some of the funding opportunities are no longer present, right? So like once we've gotten through the initial adoption phase, where does that leave us? And that's why I think this planning is just so critical. So just the quick rundown here. Take advantage of the funding opportunities that you might have to develop your own kind of government strategies, right? Do you want to be exclusive to one charging station provider, one network offering, or do you want to kind of deploy your own pilot programs to see, what the benefits, what the offerings, what the functionality is from one station type or network type to another? Engage with the community partners. Many of you are already on this phone call and this conversation today to really kind of keep in mind the siting considerations for environmental justice and equity around your communities. We don't just want to put charging stations where the EVs are today. We really want to think about making sure that there is equitable access for these technologies and for the air quality benefits that come with them, really across our jurisdictions, whatever they may be. This one is this next topic, prioritizing level 2 charging stations. That's really going to be if you're at a place where you're not sure where to start. Level 2 stations, and there's certainly a lot of headlines for good reasons with DC fast chargers. I live in the Triangle, so driving an EV out to Western North Carolina is much easier than it was a couple of years ago, thanks to the DC fast charging deployment. That's really going to be critical as we think about not only traveling from within the state, but also all of the partners or visitors, I should say, from regionally and nationally, especially that are visiting the beautiful mountains of Western North Carolina. However, prioritizing level 2 stations gives you the ability to have scale in a way that maybe DC fast charging does not. And so thinking about, again, where cars are parked and how we can really encourage just the access to more charging stations. Again, there's much more that goes into that, but I think that's just such a powerful starting place. And again, don't cite based on where the EVs are just for today. Really think about kind of how we want to accelerate growth across all communities. Thinking about municipal locations, where can we stack workplace charging and public charging together? So that's, for example, any kind of town centers, right? Somebody is, and this is actually pretty old data, but somebody is 6 times more likely to purchase an EV if they see and have workplace charging, at their employer. And so just the ability to kind of combine from a public government perspective, the ability to offer workplace charging and a public community amenity can be really powerful. And then of course, engage as possible with EV make-ready concepts. So knowing that it's not always feasible to have mandates and required ordinances. However, just planning with that in mind and educating with that in mind is going to be critically important. And please feel free to share your stories with Plug-in NC. We'd be so happy to highlight you. We have a challenge ourselves to grow our membership, to have member representation in all 100 North Carolina counties. So please be part of the community. We have over 100 members now. There's of course no charge for this. It's really just about amplifying those messages and really being able to share the good work that so many of you are doing across the state. And that's it. So I know that was a really fast kind of session, but please feel free to follow up with any questions, or happy to take a couple now as well.
Jacob, thank you very much for your presentation. I do have a question for you. You spoke about the economic development impact from large scale manufacturing coming in. Can you talk about the economic development benefits that come from adding EV chargers to downtown sites and the impact that can have?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, and I actually heard somebody mentioning it as I jumped on the phone call this morning, but, we see even in some of the smallest towns in North Carolina, session times that range for, oftentimes around 2 hours. And so, those are hours where folks are walking around, they're enjoying the community, amenities that folks have. And I think the other thing that's really important about it, Paul, is it actually puts it puts facilities or amenities or, parks, whatever it is, it puts you on the map in terms of, as an EV driver, I really make decisions based around where I can charge. So I really want to find the public parks or the hotels that have charging infrastructure. And so the ability to really kind of have whatever amenity it is that's offering charging on a map that allows a very specific kind of niche community to make decisions around where they go and how they travel with that is just critically important.
Thank you again, Jacob, for your insights. And we'll have more on the funding opportunities that are available coming up for charging stations and the like later on in the program. Thank you again, Jacob. EVs are really only one part of the alt fuel story. There's propane, there's compressed natural gas, there's biodiesel as well. And Sarah Nichols knows more about this than most anyone I know. She is the coordinator of the Land of Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition. And I'll pass it to her to share insights on that initiative and speak with fleet representatives that are working in alternative fuels. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Paul. And thank you everyone for hanging with us this late into the program already. We have an exciting roundtable. I'm going to ask Jeremiah and Ian to go ahead and turn their cameras on and get ready to go. They're going to help us with alternating the fuel in your fleet. So we've got two different perspectives from two different places and two fairly different organizations to kind of talk through what they have going on. And maybe my goal here is that you get some ideas to take away back to whatever your role in this ecosystem is. My name is Sarah Nichols. I'm the Clean Cities Coordinator for the Land of Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition. And the Clean Cities program is designated by the Department of Energy to support this region and our efforts to reduce petroleum use and decrease greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. So my hope is that in a few years, these aren't alternative fuels, that maybe gas and diesel are the alternative fuels if we can flip the narrative. I want to dive into this panel introduction. So I want to tell you how this is going to go. I'm going to let these two gentlemen introduce themselves. And Jeremiah's got a little bit of a presentation about some of the policies going on in Buncombe County. Get you guys in the audience engaged. Can you tell me if there's one thing that would make you switch from an internal combustion vehicle to an alt fuel, what would it be? So I'll be looking for those in the chat. And while we're seeing those answers come in, Ian, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Ian Bailey from Warren Wilson College. I'm the Assistant Director of Facilities, and I'm also the Motor Fleet Manager here.
Great. And Ian lives this in his personal and professional life, so that's exciting. Jeremiah, could you introduce yourself and then get your presentation up?
Sure. My name is Jeremiah Leroy. I'm the Director for the Office of Sustainability here in Buncombe County Government. And yeah, I can go ahead and share my screen. All right. Is that working? Can you see it all right?
We can see it.
Excellent. I don't know how to not have the next slide pop up, but we'll just kind of roll with it. So yeah, thanks for having me here. Paul and Ashley and Sarah asked me to come and just talk a little bit about Buncombe County and what we're doing in terms of our fleet transition. So just to share a little bit of information about our fleet itself. This is us, right? We've got a total of 445 vehicles. As you probably could guess, with most municipal governments, the biggest chunk of our fleet is always law enforcement, right? But we have obviously 35 other solid waste and 130 government operation vehicles. Currently, we have 43 total vehicles that are either hybrid, EV, or CNG. Most of those are hybrid vehicles for the sheriff's office that we were able to purchase over the last couple of years. But the question is, of course, how do we do better, right? And so for us, that was really starting with policy. We were fortunate to do this. We had a peer learning exchange with the city of Charlotte, city of Asheville, Wake county, a handful of local governments that really were all working on these same issues. And so we got together in 2020 to talk about this and to share ideas and concepts on potential policy and implementation strategies. I remember it very vividly because it was the very first day that we all got text alerts on our phones that said there is a confirmed case of COVID-19 in the state of North Carolina. And so everybody just kind of looked at each other and said, maybe we shouldn't go out for that beer afterwards. But, you know, we did anyway, because we're silly. But that's why we were there. And it was just a great exchange of ideas and really smart people in the room. And really from that sort of peer learning and exchange, we developed our first ever sort of sustainable fleet policy, which went, I guess we officially implemented it almost exactly a year ago. And the purpose of that is to align our fleet purchasing policy with our strategic focus area of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for those of you who know Buncombe County, we've got some pretty aggressive goals. We've got some 100% renewable energy goals. We've got, you know, greenhouse gas reduction goals as part of our strategic plan. And vehicle fuel makes up about a quarter of our direct, not indirect, but our greenhouse gas emissions. And we wanted a policy that was essentially, sounds simpler than it really is, requires departments to purchase the most efficient vehicle possible based on the class of vehicle they're requesting, right? So obviously we need fleet data, available technologies, the ability to support EV infrastructure, total cost of ownership modeling. All of these things went into it, but basically what comes out of it is this: there's a tiered structure for vehicle replacement, right? And you start off at tier 1. And the only way to get to tier 2 is if you make a really good argument. Because maybe there's a vehicle that doesn't meet operational needs, right? So I'm trying to eliminate the opportunities for excuses from department heads as to why they don't want to make the switch, right? But operational needs have to take priority. I always tell folks, like, if the solid waste department calls me and they need a pickup truck, I'm not going to give them a Nissan Leaf, right? Like, I'm not going to do that to them. You know, we have to be able to meet our operational needs. But this is just how this sort of flushed out for us. So we start at the zero emission vehicle and work our way down to the dirtiest vehicle, right? We also implemented an AVL pilot. AVL is automatic vehicle locator pilot. So again, trying to eliminate excuses. And I'll give you an example of that in just a second. But AVLs are basically GPS devices you plug into the vehicles, and they give us all kinds of great data. It tells us where you're driving, how you're driving, how fast you're driving, how long you're parked there, how long you're idling, movement patterns. Gives us the opportunity to look at like potential for locations for EV infrastructure. You know, obviously where these things parked all day long. Gives us the evaluation opportunities for like motor pools, because we don't currently have a motor pool, and I think we need one. I'd love to get people to stop driving their own cars and start driving our EVs. And we spend a lot of money on reimbursement for gas. So, you know, we want to be able to incorporate these vehicles wherever it's possible. And this pilot has helped us sort of gather the data we need. And just a quick example of that, our permits and inspections department, they have 14 vehicles in this pilot. And we just took a snapshot for their department director when he asked for more cars this year. We said, okay, you've got 14 vehicles. They traveled 17,000 miles during this snapshot, which was just a month. The average was 82 miles a day. The absolute most any one vehicle was driven in a single day was 177 miles. Well, just so you know, this new Ford Lightning F-150 can handle that, right? It can do all of these things. The absolute most mileage you're going to drive in any given day is not above what the max capability is of this vehicle. And we're going to save money by reducing maintenance costs, you know? So this is just kind of an example of how we're trying to use data to shift minds in our departments as to what, you know, we can meet these needs with the types of vehicles that are going to be available to us. And as most of you on this meeting probably know, the market is finally starting to change, right? 2 years ago, I couldn't have made this argument because there was no F-150 Lightning, but now we know it's coming. And my biggest concern isn't getting them in our fleet. It's just being first in line so we can actually get them, because I think the demand is going to be incredibly high. So next steps for us are to sort of flush this out and develop a more comprehensive fleet transition plan. And we're doing that this year. I'm a department of just one person, and so I've put in for a second staff person because this is just one of those planning efforts that has been beyond my bandwidth alone. And so, you know, we're looking at some long-term evaluations of, you know, what do we have? How much longer are they going to last? Again, the motor pool study, take-home vehicle policies, and a million other questions. I'm terrified of the idea of like, how are we going to handle take-home vehicles when it comes to electric vehicle charging, and the sort of, you know, Pandora's box that I'm going to open there. But, you know, we also need to keep our eyes on the market. What's coming down the line? What vehicles are coming out? When are they coming out? Can we hang on to some of the assets we have just a little bit longer so that we can make time for those market shifts? And just, you know, obviously, where are we going to put our charging infrastructure, right? We have a really bad habit of moving departments around all the time. So I'm very concerned about ensuring that once we put something in the ground, it's there to stay and it meets the needs of our departments. So we do have our budget request out today. As a matter of fact, it was due last week. And we do have 7 new EVs that have been requested by departments this year, which is pretty exciting for us. So I try to get through that as fast as I could. And I'll stop sharing now, but that's just sort of, again, I mean, how do I stop sharing here? There you go. So quick snapshot of Buncombe County, who we are, what we're doing, and sort of how we're trying to get there. And again, for us, like a lot of local governments, you got to change policy before you can change the way you change process, right? And so that's where we started, and this is where we're at. And I'm crossing my fingers. We got a lot of work ahead of us, but it's a pretty exciting time to be doing this work. So that's it for me, and we can move on to Ian or take questions, whatever you like. We can take them at the end. I'll let the moderators decide how to do that.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Since you gave a good outline of some of the fleet pieces to Buncombe County, Ian, could you kind of bring us up to speed on what you manage over there at Warren Wilson?
Sure. So Warren Wilson College, most of you all probably have heard of us before. We've been around for a couple of years, 126 now, I think. We've long preached and practiced sustainability and environmental stewardship. So as kind of a natural part of that, we've been ahead of the curve a few times on things, and I honestly would say we're a little behind the curve on EV stuff, but we did just install a couple EV chargers, level 2 chargers on campus for staff, faculty, and student use. So we're getting caught back up as that 2020 thing kind of slowed a lot of the process down. We've been using a mixture of different fuel types on this campus for a number of years now. We started buying biodiesel maybe almost 20 years ago, when Blue Ridge Biofuels was really kicking off and getting that product rolling. We started trying to purchase equipment that specifically was designed to run on biodiesel, and John Deere had an early adoption thing for that we got involved in getting some new John Deere equipment that was designed to run on B20. And we throughput quite a bit of biodiesel in our on and off-road fleet on this campus. A few years ago, 2019, we leased 10 new fleet vehicles for our motor pool and for one of our busiest traveling departments, and converted all of those to be alt fuel hybrids to run on propane and regular gasoline. So that's been a good shift for us. We've saved a lot of money in the process. We've cut our emissions considerably on our most common road going vehicles. We also run a fleet of electric golf carts. Those are still in use, and a lot of that process was grant funded originally. We're actually looking to replace some of those this year and next year, as well as moving into some diesel side-by-side UTVs for our land crews to use that will be able to run on B20 biodiesel as well.
So for both of you, you're with organizations that made this, you were able to make it a priority, but can you explain some of the biggest challenges you've had convincing its fleet managers, or if it's the people who are using these alternative fuels, the leadership, decision makers. Can you speak to that, starting with Jeremiah?
Sure. I have department heads that are 100% on board, and I have department heads that absolutely are terrified of making this switch. And it's really about, is it going to meet our needs? It's like anything new, right? You just got to convince people that like this can work for you, right? I get questions like, well, it says it can go 250 miles on a charge, but is that in the mountains? You know, and you know, I have to explain to them about regenerative braking, and you know, there's a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we have a goal of doing, and I saw your chat message about spotting a Lightning, an F-150 Lightning, which is just like super exciting, because what I would like very much, you saw 3, that's amazing. I drove past, totally off subject, I drove past a truckload of Rivian trucks on the highway the other day, and it just made me so happy. It's really about getting a road show for us, right? Like we need a couple of opportunities to get these vehicles in our fleet and show people that they will meet their needs, that they're gonna work. And frankly, I've been an EV driver for 10 years. Once you get somebody behind the wheel of one, there's not much convincing you need to do, right? Like they sell themselves pretty quickly because they are very fun to drive. So for us, the biggest shift is going to be in the minds of law enforcement, right? They are by far the biggest user for us. They are, you know, 2/3 of our fleet almost. And so getting those folks who tend to have a very sort of rigid mindset about this is what I like, this is what's going to work for us, to move in this direction starts at the top. And so I'm trying to get the sheriff himself into an EV because I think that's where you are going to change hearts and minds. You know, it's like once he sees it and gets behind the wheel, and a couple of his higher ups do as well, it's not going to take us long to get the folks down the line to sort of jump on board. So, but yeah, we get all kinds of excuses. But you know, it gets cold here. Is it going to meet our needs? Is anything from like, well, it's ground clearance, and we drive out in the middle of nowhere because Buncombe County is so rural in some areas, and frankly, most of the time, again, this is where we go back to using that AVL data. We can sort of show you. Actually, you drive around in town 98% of the time. So I know that one time a year that you drive in the mountains, you're worried about it, but this is going to meet your needs 98% of the time.
Ian, you might know about driving in the middle of nowhere with some of your vehicles. Do you want to speak to some of the challenges and how you overcome them?
My space bar just quit working for unmuting. Yeah, I mean, as far as challenges institutionally, finance is really the only one I face here. Warren Wilson, because of its long-standing history of environmental stewardship, I don't have to do a lot of convincing. I have to convince the people that sign the checks that the investment is worth it. And that is sometimes a hurdle, but I'm a very much a data collecting person. We haven't really gotten into doing any AVL stuff, but my campus and fleet is small enough to where I kind of know where everybody goes just about all the time. And it's, you know, what we see is that the turnarounds on those investments come pretty quickly. I mean, just for a point of reference, I paid in November, I was paying less than $2 a gallon for propane. Honestly, I couldn't tell you what gasoline costs now, but I hear it's expensive. I bought my first EV in June. I bought a pre-loved Chevy Bolt, and I have put 13,000 miles on it since June. I've done over 12,000 miles of electric driving by the month of December, including a 1,300-mile trip the second week that I owned the car with my family. We loaded up, took it to Florida, drove all over Florida. I really just kind of wanted to prove to myself, as having formerly been a naysayer, that it couldn't be done. And you know, so the proof's in the pudding. I put my butt in the seat. I love driving that car. It's more fun than anything else that I've got to drive within reason. but I haven't bought gas since June, so I don't even know what it costs.
More expensive than it was 6 months ago, I can tell you that.
I bet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's, you know, over here, there's not a lot of convincing. One thing I've run into is kind of a re-education campaign. I've got a lot of the people on this campus trust me because I am the vehicle professional. I'm the specialist on campus, and they trust my insight on things. But a lot of them just haven't really paid attention to how things have changed. We're going through some kind of like future fleet planning right now with a lot of the land crews. And one of the insights I gave to one of those supervisors was he was talking about buying F-250 trucks and F-350 trucks. And I said, go back and look at the towing capacity of that F-250 from 2000 that you're using right now, and look at the towing capacity on the F-150 with a battery in it that's about to hit the market. And I was like, you're going to find that the F-150 with the gas engine right now is more efficient and pulls as much as your old 250 did. The classes have changed. The vehicles are more capable and more efficient. And so that's a lot of what I'm doing right now, is just kind of campaigning around campus with those that use a lot of vehicles and are looking at their future planning, and having them feed back to their direct supervisors that they may have found a more efficient means of doing that. We're looking at moving away from a lot of diesel stuff everywhere we can, and potentially maybe moving into replacing those diesel trailer pulling rigs with gasoline engines with propane upfits on them. We've had really good success out of the propane biofuel kits. So it's worked real well for us.
There's one other thing, and I don't want to take too much time, Sarah, but there is actually a tool that we discovered with Charlotte. I want to say it's like Atlas Public Policy that actually puts out a total cost of ownership modeling tool, where you can do side-by-side comparisons of, hey, I want the comparison between this regular Chevy sedan and then a Chevy Bolt, and I'm going to own it for 5 years. Here's the initial cost, here's the long-term cost, and you can actually, you know, spit out the difference long-term cost of ownership of comparison vehicles, right? So when it comes to like selling the higher levels, getting drivers switched is a mindset thing. Getting the higher levels to buy into this stuff is a dollar and cents thing sometimes. And so when I talk about our budget, I can say, well, we're actually, you know, we don't own vehicles for a year, right? This is a purchase that we're going to own 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road. Long term, we save money with these vehicles, right? And we have the models built for us that can prove that. So that's just one more tool that we use to try and move this down the line.
That's great. And we have, the Department of Energy does give us some similar tools too. So if we're working with you, we can help, you know, make that decision and make connections to the fleet with the fuel providers that could help with the infrastructure pieces too, and the sales, bulk deals. You both mentioned data collection and planning and funding as, you know, things that come into these decisions for you. And there is going to be a bunch of money that comes down the line for specific things. Can you speak or give someone some advice on what they should be doing now, or what you guys are doing to kind of prepare for that moment?
It's all about planning for us, right? Like we're working on this process now to really just evaluate the next 5 years of our lives, right? Because there is going to be opportunities that fall in our lap pretty soon, cross our fingers pretty soon, that, you know, if we don't have something sort of mapped out, I think charging is going to be one big one, right? Like EV infrastructure, there's some potential for some massive funding coming down the pipeline. Well, if you don't know where you need it, and you don't know the challenges of putting it in particular facilities or locations, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And so we're working on with a local engineering group to sort of evaluate all of our facilities and look at their current electrical loads, for example, and, you know, where can we implement these things quickly and easily, and then where is there going to be more of a challenge, right? Where there might be some pretty big upfits to the electrical system of a particular facility. If we're going to add a half a dozen or a dozen or even more, charging stations to a particular facility. So for us, it's really just about, trying the best we can, just given that it's a bit of a moving target for us to have a plan in place. And then once funding is available, to execute.
Ian, you also are the chair of the Blue Ridge EV Club. And they're another group that's very active with us to kind of help us with those infrastructure decisions. What do you think is on the horizon in terms of planning?
Yeah, the Blue Ridge EV Club adopted me a few months ago and gifted me a vice president role that I'm grateful for. I've been actually spending a lot of time at events in East Tennessee with the Knoxville EV Club and really liking the way they organize stuff and looking at a lot of the work they've been doing. And I'm trying to bring that energy into the club. We have just started in November meeting in person again. And we've started kicking off some monthly events. We're currently cycling through the various different Ingles grocery stores in the area that have level 2 chargers on site. We're doing second Saturday of the month, we have a meetup. People come. The first one was huge. We did it on Smoky Park Highway, and we had 2 rows packed out with EVs. It was really impressive. And so we've been doing that on a regular basis, and we're actually have been talking a lot about getting involved in some local government work to go back to some of the stuff that Plug and NC is talking about working on, is trying to get these developers. There's obviously a ton of development happening in Buncombe County right now, trying to get the developers interested in getting things EV capable at least. And we want to get involved in some government action to try to push changing permitting and building code to involve those EV capable spots. Part of the reason I was able to install 4 plugs of charging on this campus this year in about 5 hours of work is because the new building that we built a number of years ago and just commissioned in 2019 had that raceway in place and the dedicated spot in the breaker panel. So I was able to just go to that building, pull the wire, put the charger in, and we walked away. We were done. We did the same down here at the facilities. We pulled an old circuit and popped one in the facilities building. So I was able to fairly quickly commission that. I've been here about 5 years, and I really, as soon as I got here, started making those plans. And it's a lot of what Jeremiah said. It's looking at what you've got, where you've got it, looking at the total cost of ownership on the fleet vehicles, and having that set forth ahead of you. I built a 5-year plan 3 years ago. 2020 put me a year behind on it. It was, headed the right way. 2021, we started to play a little bit of catch up, and now we're moving to actually get back where we wanted to be on the plan. So our motor pool fleet is where it was supposed to be in 2022 as of, well, today, if my last van arrives. After that, following grants and being ready for the money to come down the pipeline. We're a pretty small institution for as big as the fleet is. So it's fairly challenging for me to be able to put a proposal out there that costs a whole lot of money. We don't have a huge budget to work with on that, but being 2 years or 3 years ahead on knowing Volkswagen settlement funds are coming, on knowing that charging infrastructure needs are changing and the charger costs are coming down. I was able to buy dual plug level 2 chargers for under $1,000 a piece. They're just stupid chargers. They don't log any data, which I don't like, but it also meant that I could instantly pull the trigger on it and buy them on my P card and get them shipped in and installed, instead of having to wait for somebody to approve a $7,000 purchase for something that's got some brains in it. So sometimes it's baby steps too. It's putting what you can where you can and looking forward to the next thing. Now I'm looking for what I want to install in our parking lots on the main road and how we want to have access available to those for public charging, not just institutional use.
We hear a lot about normalizing alternative fuels. And you guys are both kind of leaders in this space, but what kind of steps should we be, Jeremiah, you mentioned, and we talk about it too, butts in seats, that if we can get them to drive them, we can, usually that's a good first step to convincing them. But in the general public, what kinds of things do you think we should be doing to normalize alternative fuels?
That's a great question. And I love that I said that. And then Ian was like, I was a doubter and then I got one and it was awesome, you know, because I think that really does change hearts and minds for sure. But, you know, I don't think that, I don't think that it's necessarily up to us, right? Like, I think we can play a role in that. And I think people, like, visibility matters, right? People need to see, and I want to say somebody had in the chat, like, a sheriff's office vehicle that is clearly an EV, right? Not one that hides and you can't necessarily tell, right? But it has 0 emissions just stenciled on the side of it, you know, where we have the opportunity to, like, plaster this in front of people's faces. You know, we have to show them that, like, your city and county government are running on these vehicles and doing a good job, right? Those are the opportunities that we have. But I think you're also just seeing these manufacturers, they're going to want to sell these cars, right? So they're doing a lot to try and change hearts and minds on this as well, with the various marketing and advertising campaigns that they're doing. But when it comes to the opportunities that we have, I just think that with every vehicle we have to focus on, you know, what are the public engagement opportunities there, right? Like, it's great to have these vehicles out at the landfill doing their job and not using diesel fuel. That's awesome. Nobody sees those though. So it's important to switch those out too. But I also want real opportunity for public engagement in terms of law enforcement, permits and inspections, and those, like, what are the other, the health code enforcement folks that drive out to restaurants every day and park in front of the restaurant, you know, they need to see these things everywhere they go. And it's really the biggest thing I think we can do to show people that, like, these vehicles do everything you need them to do, and that we're, again, trying to, like you said, trying to be a leader in this space, right? Like, that, you know, local government can do it. It's working. It's effective. It saves us money long term, and we need to be proactive about those marketing opportunities as well. Like, I need to be out there giving presentations, showing folks that, hey, we just saved X amount on our carbon, but we also saved X amount on our fuel usage, et cetera. Meeting with the Rotary clubs of the world, you know, like I need to have those types of engagement opportunities, which, you know, one day we'll meet in person again. I have high hopes that I will actually see real human faces close to mine when I go to have these types of meetings. But I said that a year ago, so I'm still waiting.
Here we are, still in this Zoom
happen.
box. Ian would be we did a ride and drive event out at Warren Wilson. Those outdoor events are great. And the car club does a lot of those kinds of events. We held one for Clean Cities coordinators with all kinds of fuels back in the fall. And here's a shameless plug. We're partnering with the City of Asheville Parks and Rec Department for Truck City, which is normally just bring out your big truck and see it. I said, can we make an alt fuel area so we can show that, kind of what you're saying, Jeremiah, that they look the same, but they're different, or they look different, and that's cool. Like, we're hoping to bring out different technologies. We would welcome bringing some lightnings or other things that are coming on the market and using that as a way to kind of expand the narrative. So if you have some vehicles you want in that show, we would love to see them show up in our, what I'm calling the alt fuel alley of Truck City at the Asheville outlets. We are gonna, I don't see any questions here in the chat. If you've got one, throw it in there for these guys. I'm gonna ask one more. What is a pressing industry-wide problem, and how do you think it could be solved?
So can we get a little more specific with that question, right? Industry-wide, meaning just alternative fuel vehicles
Alternative
as
fuel
a
in
whole?
fleets, alternative fuels in fleets.
So
What is it?
my head right now, the first thing that pops into my brain is just perception, right? There is this perception. There is still things like range anxiety being a real thing, even though we're up to like 300 miles, you know, of daily charging, you know, ability. Again, it comes back to those, what are those immediate questions I get from department heads when I tell them like, I can get you an EV. They immediately go back to, can it do it in the mountains? What about the cold weather? You know, what about battery life in these conditions? And of course, they call almost extreme conditions, right? Like this, first of all, this happens 2 days out of the year that you even need to worry about it. But it's well, there you go, 500 miles in a Lucid. I like it. You know, I think there's just a perception still, and it's changing, but these things don't happen quickly. You know, I don't like that when I push the gas pedal, I don't hear anything. I actually heard that from somebody like 2 weeks ago. It doesn't make a sound when I go fast. Like, yeah, but you go really fast. So, you know, like there's just a mindset, I think, that, you know, we're working on changing, and we're going to do it, and everybody else is working on it too. I mean, the manufacturers are working on it too. They got some great advertisements on these things. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Ian.
No, Ian, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of like to piggyback on that. Yeah, I mean, perception is certainly the biggest hindrance currently. And yeah, again, getting butts in seats and getting people to realize it. I mean, I'm a long-standing hot rod guy. A lot of people know me as a person who built a lot of really fast hot rod cars 10-ish years ago. And a lot of those friends are like, I just didn't expect to see you driving an electric car. And I was like, have you ever ridden in one of these things? Watch me jerk a knot in your Corvette from 0 to 30. It is. I mean, it's, you know, it's enjoyable to drive, and it's, you know, that range anxiety perception. You know, the smallest part of that is where I was a naysayer. I was like, yeah, EVs are great, and I was super excited in 2016 when they announced that the Chevy Bolt with a B was coming as a 239-mile battery electric. It was exciting, but until I owned one, I was still like, they're great for short around town stuff, but you know, long trips could be challenging. It took a little bit more planning, and I had the most relaxed and longest time drive to Florida and back I've ever had, but it was the most relaxed I've ever been when I got there, and I had a 3-year-old in the car. So if any of y'all have ever driven with a 3-year-old, it's a challenge on its own. But we had a good time with it, and it helped me get my perspective changed that long distance travel was very viable. Now, prior to Volkswagen settlement, that wasn't really as viable of a case. And the backup problem to perception is the next thing is infrastructure. But when you're working on people with perception, you got a lot of attitudes about what it is or what it isn't, how it doesn't make that noise, how it, you know, the noise my car makes when you mash the go pedal down is wee from everybody in the car. It is. I mean, it sounds funny, but if you haven't driven one, you need to.
I love it.
They sell themselves. And you know, another way to help change perception is sometimes you got to reach people on the level that they're on. Sometimes you have to reach people on a space that they are comfortable with. And in the political climate that we currently have, sometimes it's become polarized where EVs belong and what alternative fuel is. And it's like it's pushed over to this box of like liberal tree hugging nonsense, you know, which it is, and it's a great place for it. But the truth of the matter is, if you're driving an electric car, your car is powered by 100% American utility energy. We're not buying gas from overseas and going to war for that. We're making electricity here, and all of it is made here. We don't have to defend other countries' honor in order to keep a hand in the pocket of us moving ourselves around. It's an American commodity. It's another reason I'm a big advocate of propane. Propane is 100% American commodity, and it's the same kind of thing. We're centralizing our consumption into commodities that we control, not that other people control. And our own security as a country in the future depends on being willing to adopt these things. And I have seen some people change their tune when it comes down to it. You know, a guy at the last meetup showed up in a snazzy new Corvette and came over to just try to throw all the detractor things at us he could. And Dave Erb, who's in here, took him to school, which is good because I wanted to, but Dave took it, and it was a little nicer than I might have been. The guy thanked me when he left, and he said, "But what about when people start charging for you to charge here?" And I said, "Where do you get gas for free for that Corvette?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Who gives you gas for free?" He said, "Nobody gives gas for free." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'm charging for free here, but if they want to charge me for it, I'm okay with that because I'd have to buy gas anyway." And, you know, it's kind of twisted his head. And, you know, there's a lot of that out there. Snowstorm in Virginia thing. You know, everybody's like, "Oh, the EVs would have blocked the whole highway." Well, trust me, if there was a Tesla broken down blocking the highway there, we would have heard about it. The truth of the matter is a couple of content producers have done videos with Teslas and Chevy Bolts and shown that for many, many, many hours, the amount of consumption is very low to stay at a comfortable temperature, like 70 to 72 degrees in the cabin. And it's, you know, with your police force, you know, how much time do they spend idling? When everybody's like, "Well, how fast does your battery go dead when you're just sitting there in traffic?" And I'm like, "Well, if it's a nice day, I roll the windows down and it doesn't. I just sit there. Like, it doesn't use any energy to sit still." That's, you know, it's changing perceptions and finding people in the place where it's important, I think is the biggest part of that.
We had a couple of notes in here, so I'm going to ask one more question just regarding savings and cost. Certainly, we're aware that the fuel cost has a differential on gas and diesel, but also the maintenance cost. If you had to guess how much you guys save in using these alternative fuels, what would that be?
Well, for our personal fleet, the propane alt fuel vehicles, there is a literal tons less carbon in propane auto gas than there is in regular gasoline. You're talking about 3 atoms of carbon in a molecule versus like 12 to 16-ish in gas. It varies. So the long-term effects, I haven't had them long enough to see. But when we do oil changes, the oil still looks new. And I change at a 3,000 to 4,000 mile interval just as a matter of being old school and insisting on it. But the maintenance that we're having is we're not getting carbon buildups in some of the small engines. We've been running mowers for a decade on propane. They don't have any carbon buildup in them. The ethanol that's in fuel makes this nice brown tacky substance in the upper intakes on vehicles, and we're not getting that. We're not getting sticky throttle bodies. The maintenance end of using a cleaner burning fuel is pretty considerable. When you move over to electric, I've bought maybe $6 worth of washer fluid since I had my car. And I don't really think I haven't done anything else with it since June. I mean, that's what my maintenance looks like. I'll probably buy some tires this year at some point. But that's, you know, a cabin air filter. That's about it. And I actually just got my 2017's battery replaced last week under the recall. So they're rolling those through. Anybody that's got a Bolt, keep an eye on your recall number, as you can get it moved way ahead of when Chevy actually gets around to sending you a letter about the battery is ready.
So we don't currently have like a ton of data to support this internally because we're still working on getting these things into our fleet. But just in the research that I've done up to this point, obviously being an EV driver for the last 10 years, I've spent nothing on maintenance, nothing, changed out my tires once. I mean, it's nothing, you know. But in general, what we're seeing in the research that has been done is an average of anywhere from 35 to 40% in overall maintenance cost savings for fleets that start to make this transition, right? So, I think that's a conservative estimate personally, but that's what the data that has been out there recently has suggested for fleet folks, is that 35 or 40% on maintenance costs overall.
Thank you guys for this. I enjoyed it. I hope the attendees and the other panelists got something out of it that they can take back to their community. I wanted to circle on a couple things. We do have that Truck City. If you have an alt-fuel vehicle you want to put in it, please let us know. Likewise, the car clubs have a couple of shows. There's a Tesla Blue Ridge Parkway Drive coming up and a big car club show. I think all of that is kind of getting centered out of the Asheville outlet malls in April. Get signed up for our newsletter, get signed up for their newsletter, look on our websites. There will be more information as those dates get closer. Often with Clean Cities, if you're familiar with us, we do an annual report. We are in annual report season right now. So if you have alt-fuel data to share with us, we'll be reaching out to you. If we typically don't report your information, but you have some, we'd love to get it in there to give great numbers back to the Department of Energy, helps keeps us going. Something we help a lot of you guys out with is funding, and I am pleased to get to introduce Brian Phillips with DAQ, who works with us a lot in the VW settlement funding. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that program. He's going to talk about the next upcoming cycle and how we need to get ready for it. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here just to talk about the second settlement program. Let me see, share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Can't just yet.
I guess it helps to hit the share button.
I do that all the time. We got it. Thank you, Brian.
All right, so I'm here to talk about Volkswagen settlement. I'll start out with talking about what we're doing, what we did in phase one, where we currently are in phase one, and I'll talk through our phase two process. So currently, our program managers are completing our site visits for projects where we receive claims. We approved about 1.6 million in claims so far in phase one. Majority of those have been charging projects. We did submit our phase two mitigation plan to the trustee on December 28th. So we are gearing toward the rollout of a phase two RFPs, hopefully early next month. And our timeline for phase two request for proposals is now on our website. Phase two, we're going to do slightly different from phase one. If you remember in phase one, we kind of did everything all at once. We did the diesel bus vehicle program and the DC fast program at the same time. And then later on, we did the level 2 program. This time, we're going to break out our program separately into 3 groups. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. So in phase one, we awarded $26.4 million in projects. The majority of those were to school buses, 111 school buses, and of the 111, 6 were electric, 5 were for DPI, and 1 was for the Eastern Band of Cherokee. We did fund 16 transit buses, and we did fund, I believe, 11 of those buses were all electric. And we also funded 45 on-road projects. There were no electric projects on that one. There were some alternative fuel projects as well. And then we also funded 27 DC fast charging infrastructure sites and 78 level 2 charging infrastructure sites. So if you look at the pie chart, the majority of our funds went towards school buses and transit buses. And we did spend a little bit slightly less than the 15% we had planned for EV charging infrastructure. And that's only because we did have some projects that dropped out as we got toward our contracting phase. So the extra money will be applied to phase two. We do have on our website some of our success stories. If you click the link and this presentation was passed out, it'll take you to our website. Let's see if it comes up. So we have our success stories by program. So there are several DC fast sites in here you can go through. We're adding new success stories as we complete our site visits. It's level 2 site visits, and then our on heavy duty program and our school bus program. We don't have any transit buses projects completed yet, but we are hearing some will be done fairly soon. So in phase 1, we had a total of 27.3 annual tons of NOx reduced from all the projects that were funded. The majority of those were from school buses. I mean, we did have 111 school buses converted, so that does make sense. And then the next group was transit buses, due to most of them being all electric. So phase 2 is what everybody's really concerned about. If you remember in our phase 1 mitigation plan, we had planned 3 phases of the program. So in phase 2, we decided to combine phases 2 and 3 into one final phase, and we combined both pots of money into one final pot of money of $67.9 million. So in phase 2, like I said, we're splitting our programs up individually. So the school bus program has the most money again. That'll be 40% of the overall pot of money for phase 2 is $27.1 million. Our transit bus program and our clean heavy duty bus program, our clean heavy duty vehicle program are both receiving 20% funds. And you'll notice on the clean heavy duty vehicle program, we have some money set aside for our DERA program. That's the Diesel Emission Reduction Act program. That's a program funded by EPA. The state receives, I'm sorry, that's my dog. We receive annual funds from the EPA to fund projects to reduce these emissions. So we are able to match those funds or overmatch those funds using VW settlement funds, and we are doing that in phase 2. And you also see that we are giving priority to electric vehicle replacements in phase 2. That doesn't mean that any other vehicle type would be funded. We're just trying to stress mostly money funds going to all electric replacements as much as possible. Moving along to our ZEV infrastructure programs, something different we're doing in phase 2 is we're splitting our DC fast program into 2 separate programs. The first DC fast RFP that will be released sometime in February will be our public access priority corridors. We have worked with our partners at NCDOT to identify corridors across the state that will include evacuation routes, infrastructure where there's needed charging infrastructure. So those will receive first priority awards in phase 1. It's about almost a little bit under $5 million for that program. A little bit later in the process, we'll open up another RFP for existing DC fast sites to upgrade current obsolete charging stations and also add additional capacity to highly utilized sites across the state to add more capacity for EV users. And we're putting $2.1 million toward that program. Our level 2 program, we did add one additional program to our level 2 program as a state government program. That will be for state agencies. We did hear back from state agencies in our planning of the phase 2 mitigation plan that our process for level 2 was a little bit too short for them, that state government does not work very fast, as most people probably already know. So we that program will be a different type of program where it won't be first come, first serve. It'll be a traditional contract as opposed to agreement as opposed to the other level 2 programs. We will still have our public access level 2 program, which also includes local governments, and that'll be $1 million available for that program. Our workplace program and our multi-unit dwelling programs both have about a little less than $500,000 for funding. And we are still spending the full 15% allowed by the Volkswagen consent decree for our phase 2 ZEV infrastructure projects. And we're going to continue on with our phase 1 goal of only spending 5% on admin costs to have most of the funds going toward projects in the state. So timeline. Like I said, we are breaking our groups up into 3 different groups. Our first group will be released in February, hopefully very soon in February. We will separate within each group different RFPs to help us with our outreach. So our first RFP that would go out would be our transit bus program RFP. And then we'll have our DC fast infrastructure program for the priority corridors, and then our level 2 state agency program RFP. Group 2 RFPs will be the school bus program in March and our level 2 publicly accessible program in March as well. And finally, our group 3 RFPs are a clean heavy duty equipment and vehicle replacement program. There will be in April. Our DC fast existing site capacity increases, April as well. Our level 2 multi-unit dwelling and workplace RFPs will be in May of 2022. So we will start planning our information meetings. Once the first RFP is released, we'll start scheduling information sessions for the DAQ grant management system. And this phase is going to be slightly different. In phase one, everything but the level 2 was a paper application. We now have an online grants management system where everything will be handled online. So if you're not currently registered for a system, you will need to get registered for a system. And we encourage everyone that is not registered to attend one of our webinars on how to register for the system, because there is certain documentation that's required for this. So this system allows you to apply for your submit your application. We process your contracts through the system or agreements to the system, and also you'll submit your documentation for your claim reimbursement through the system as well, and it'll all be electronic. We'll also have additional webinars about the each individual program request for proposals. We plan to have multiple webinars for each RFP, so to make sure we have the best outreach that we can. And our new program that we are starting out, phase 2, is our historically under-resourced county outreach program, which I'll discuss a little bit further in the presentation. But we'll have webinars for that throughout all 3 phases of the program. So if you have not currently subscribed to our VW email list, I do encourage you to do so. I'll have the slide up several more times during this presentation. If you'd like to join the list, please send the word subscribe in the subject line of the email to daq.nc_VWgrants@ncdener.gov. We will send out notifications when RFPs are released, when webinars are scheduled. So if you're not on the list, I do encourage you to get on the list and make sure you're in the loop of what's going on in phase 2. So phase 2 mitigation plan, some priorities we have in phase 2. School bus program electrification is a goal, and we have a goal of awarding at least 50% of the funds for all electric school buses as much as possible. Heavy duty light vehicle electrification is another priority for phase 2. We will continue to invest a full 15% for EV infrastructure and provide outreach to historically under-resourced counties in the state. And I'll discuss that a little bit later, how we define that. And continue to fund some projects in our rural counties. We did a really good job. We commit to spend at least 32% in phase 1. We continue to commit at least 32% in phase 2. In phase 1, we spent probably about 45% of the funds in rural counties. So we actually did better than we actually planned, which is good. And also continue to focus on the public sector. We know the public sector needs are far greater than the resources that are available. So who's eligible to apply in phase 2? Eligible applicants are projects submitted by local, states, and tribal government organizations, projects submitted by a public or private nonprofit organizations, projects submitted by public-private partnerships where the lead applicant is a public sector or public-private nonprofit. And then for our ZEV infrastructure programs, both public and private applicants are eligible to apply. So our historically under-resourced county outreach program. So we've been developing an outreach program to help counties that historically have not had the resources to effectively identify eligible vehicles for grant programs and submit quality applications. So our outreach may change after analysis. Actually, just that since we did change our outreach counties, we added several more counties to the program after the evaluation of 2020 census data by environmental justice team. And these applications may also receive scoring bonuses. That has not been determined yet, but that's a possibility. So this is a map of the historically outreach counties that are in the that we identified. Even though a county may not be on this list, does not mean we will not help you out. So if you really do need some help in identifying vehicles, I encourage you to reach out to us, and we can schedule a one-on-one webinar with local officials to help identify vehicles, and also bring in other resources as well, like land and sky staff as well. So who can you contact? I'm the main source for the program. I'm the lead for the program. Sharon Martin is our Department Public Information Officer, and Robin Barrows is our lead for our VW outreach. Now for individual programs, our school bus program lead is Sheila Blanchard. Our transit bus program lead is Melanie Henderson. Our clean heavy duty diesel program lead is Joe Vitas. Our DC fast program lead is Dave Willis. And our level 2 program lead is Stephen Rice. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Brian. We'll look for questions after Jen presents as well. I am getting her video ready to go. The the funding that Brian outlined for the VW program is just one of the sources of funding to support EV infrastructure. Jen Weiss is the Senior Advisor for Climate Change Policy at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, and she's here to share what's coming to the state from the bipartisan infrastructure legislation package. Jen, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. And I apologize, I'm coming in right at the end of Brian's presentation. I always love to hear what they're doing over in DAQ with the VW settlement. So hi, everyone. I'm going to try to share my screen, I think. Let's see if this will work. Are you guys seeing my slides?
We can see it. Yeah.
Now?
Yeah, we're in the presenter view. Thank you.
Yep. Perfect. All right, so I won't take up a lot of your time because I know you are wrapping up, but I did want to come and just talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that we're seeing for ZEVs, as well as alt fuel vehicles within the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's changed its name many times, so I think that's what it's called now. I'm going with that anyway. So as you know, if you've ever looked at this law, it's hundreds of pages long. So there's a lot going on in here, but I tried to pull out the different things that were specifically related to vehicles that you guys might be interested in, and I'm happy to have follow-up conversations on any of these. As you know, it was a sweeping legislation that was signed into law on November 15th last year, and had about $7.5 billion in funding, new funding, to build out a national network of EV charging and alt fuel infrastructure. So that's huge. And I'll talk a little bit about the amounts that will be coming to North Carolina for that. It also had other types of ZEV eligible funds in different modes of transportation, so about 50 billion there, and then 39 billion in new investment to modernize transit. So there's a lot of money in the transit area. So obviously, Department of Transportation is very interested in what is going on, and we're keeping our eye on all of the guidelines and all of the deadlines and application periods. But what I thought I'd share, and I think Paul can probably share these slides with you afterwards, but just a couple of the ones that I'm keeping my close eye on, because I think these are really interesting opportunities for our state. The first one, as I mentioned, is the National EV Formula Program. So this is money that will be coming directly to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And we're estimating it will be about 109 million over 5 years, so a little over 20 million each year. So this will help support EV chargers along our alternative fuel corridors, what's already been federally designated. We're required with this funding to complete that network first. And so we are right now working with Brian and his team, utilities and others, to try to figure out where do we have coverage now on these corridors, and where are there gaps, and where will the state need to help fill in. So that's one of the programs. And then kind of the companion piece to that is this grants for charging and fueling infrastructure, which is a competitive based funding opportunity up to, well, 2.5 billion is the total, and we can do up to 15 million per award for what we're applying for. And this one's interesting because this one gets out more into our communities. So 50% of the program funds will be dedicated to community grants to just build up the networks outside of these alternative fuel corridors. And so we want to really understand where we have gaps there, where we have needs, not only for electric vehicle charging, but this can also be used for other alternative fuels as well. Priority is going to be given here to rural, low to moderate income and underserved communities, much like Brian was discussing with the VW settlement funds. We really want to keep an intentional eye on where funding is going to be needed in those areas as well. One of the things I'll mention here is I did put this section on each of these. So if you are going through the infrastructure law, you can find it quickly with that section number. And then one other one just to keep your eye on, we're still waiting for a little bit of guidance on what this is going to look like, but there is money coming to DOT to develop a carbon reduction program. So within 2 years, the state, the Department of Transportation, in consultation with any of our MPOs, are going to create this plan, and it's supporting reductions across the board in transportation emissions. So it could be ports, it could be trains, it could be transit, it could be vehicles. And so we're looking for more guidance on what that's going to look like, and we'll start to develop that and work on that. And then finally, I just wanted to mention 3 other competitive grant programs that we're keeping our eye on. One of them is not within DOT, But it's actually a very interesting one through the EPA is $5 billion for the Clean School Bus Program. This one, 50% of the funds can go to school buses that are being replaced with zero emission vehicles, electric, but 50% can also go to other alternative fuels. So in addition to the funding that Brian was just talking about through the VW funding, we have the opportunity to also apply for other competitive grants to keep extending that. And so I plan to, Brian, I hope this is okay, work more closely with DAQ to kind of develop these plans in conjunction so that we're kind of building on the great work that's already happening over in Department of Air Quality. Another one that is also related to buses is about 3.9 billion in grants for buses and bus facilities. This one requires the DOT to submit a zero emission, actually this is a transit plan, not a transition plan. So we are currently working on that over here at DOT to build that plan and what that would look like to start transitioning our transit fleets over. And then finally, this may or may not be interesting. I know there's not a lot of ports out in the land of sky country, but there is about 250 million for reduction of truck emissions at port facilities. And so we are kind of looking at that one to see what we might be able to do to electrify things in our ports on our eastern coast of North Carolina. Again, these were just a few of them. I just wanted to just mention a couple of things that we're keeping our eye on. If there are others that you all are looking at, have questions on, want to talk to us about, please reach out. There's my contact information there. And I look forward to talking to you. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Jen. While we wait for questions, I have a first one, and so also will work as a little bit of a plug. I'm curious to know what you would offer communities now as a way to prepare for the money that's coming through these programs. I will share the Clean Vehicles Coalition as a first step to reach out to the Clean Cities affiliates here in North Carolina. There's the Land of Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition out west. There's the Centralina Clean Fuels Initiative that serves the Charlotte area, and then Triangle J in the Triangle area. So in addition to reaching out to your Clean Cities affiliates, what are first steps that communities should take to take advantage of these funding opportunities?
Yeah, I'll let Brian go first because this is more immediate.
I would say for like local governments, make sure you've talked to like your local boards that provide the funding, that you have their buy-in for your project. We had a couple of projects where we awarded funding and that they had to wait several months before the board could approve the funding, which delayed our contracting process. But just look at your vehicles. If you place some vehicles, look at your vehicle fleet and see what vehicles you have eligible for replacement. The older the vehicle, the more emission reductions you'll get, so it probably will score higher. And as for like charging infrastructure, I think the biggest issue for most of our awardees was the host site agreement. So start working with finding sites for charging infrastructure that have hosts that are willing to put charging infrastructure in, and that they're aware that they'll be losing a couple of parking spaces for this charging infrastructure. So we did have a couple of places that pulled out because they refused to dedicate 2 spaces for charging infrastructure. So those are a few things that I can recommend.
Yeah, and I'll just add, as I mentioned, we're still waiting for the guidance from the federal. Am I echoing? Sorry. From the federal government on a lot of these programs. But in the meantime, many of you probably saw Executive Order 246 that Governor Cooper signed in January 7th, I believe, is when he signed it. And one of the things that does is kick off a clean transportation plan process, a planning process for the state that DOT will be facilitating. This is a large stakeholder engagement. And so I'm hoping for all of your communities to get involved with this. There will be separate work groups for charging infrastructure. There will be work groups for fleet transitions. There will be some for light duty transition. So you'll be seeing more information on this probably within the next couple of weeks, but just want to put a plug in there for being as engaged as you feel comfortable with this planning process, because we want to develop a really robust state plan that represents all our communities.
Well, I appreciate that insight. Not seeing any questions and having run through over 2 hours to this point, I don't think that there's anything wrong with ending a little bit early. Before I close things out today, I just want to share a link to Thursday's webinar, which is going to discuss sharing resources to promote energy efficiency and renewable energy projects for local governments and schools. So please consider registering for that. And with that, I just want to thank all the panelists for participating today. Really appreciate the insights and the opportunities you all shared. And I look forward to connecting with more people through our work at the Land to Sky Clean Vehicles Coalition and the Clean Air Campaign. Thank you to all Clean Air Campaign members for the work putting this webinar series together. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone on Thursday. Y'all take care.